The whole issue of autonomous cars right now is one of excitement and a little bit of having to take a step back and really look at what the liability issues are going to be. As insurers, we look at risk. Our process and the success of our business is to assess risk and then to price it. So when you have a new type of a vehicle, when you have a whole new type of a system where there's not a history of how many accidents or claims that are filed, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a challenge. There's no question about it. And then we're going to have to look at liability and risk in much different of a situation than we do now. Because what you're looking at right now is you're looking at cars that are going to be driven by software. And if you know software, you know there could be glitches in software. If you play a game at home, if you have a computer program on your computer, you know that there's going to be glitches. So in this case, we're going to have to understand how those glitches are going to affect this and then what the liability is going to be. On the road, if there's an accident, for instance, who's liable for that accident? Is it the manufacturer of the software? Is it the auto manufacturer because maybe the program was okay, but the way it was integrated inside the car maybe wasn't? Or is it the driver, actually not driver, but the person in the vehicle that's supposed to override in case there is an accident pending? So it brings out a whole nother world of liability and of risk that we have to look at. And the challenge is really going to be in understanding it and then trying to price it according to what that risk is. Well, we know that as a fact, but you have to understand in this case, actually, especially in California and a couple of other states, I know Nevada, the same thing, we actually worked with some of the manufacturers to create laws that allowed them to actually test these cars. So in California, for instance, and in Nevada as well too, we have laws that allow them to test these kinds of cars. So now that we have those laws, the next process is going to be to look at traffic safety and how that's going to be affected by this. So unfortunately, I think there's going to be a time that we're going to find that the technology is going to be moving much faster than legislation. As you know, it takes a while for a law to be enacted. Traffic safety is one that gets, investigated over and over again. So I think there will be some challenges with the timing of the legislative process versus, how technology gets implemented. You have to understand that when it comes to traffic laws, there's federal laws and there are state laws. So it's going to be at both. When it comes to insurance, that's definitely going to be at the state level. Insurance is regulated state by state, and what works in one state doesn't necessarily apply to another. So when it comes to the actual insurance aspect of it, that will be state by state. When it comes to the traffic safety and traffic laws, that will be a combination of both state and federal.
Okay.
That could be a problem. I mean, we see that sometimes now. I mean, if you look at just speed laws, for instance, they vary. When I go from California into Arizona, for instance, it's 70 on the California side, and all of a sudden it goes to 75 on the Arizona side. So again, that would be the case I would think in this case, and there might be some challenges there. Again, like anything, anybody traveling state to state, and I think we see that now, you need to be aware of what the laws are. You have to understand that. And the insurance laws as well, because you may be insured in California, and the law might be a little bit different in the state that you're going to. You may have full coverage here, and when you travel into a state, there may be a limit. So you have to understand those kinds of parameters as well. We've heard all different figures, and until it actually happens, that's when you're going to know. For all we know, these go on the road, and it's total chaos. So I think the real, I guess, challenge for insurers is that we're going to have to take a very close look at these things. And you have to understand, too, that insurance and technology and car manufacturing are not separated. We have an institute called the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, for instance. They're the crash dummy people. They're the ones that do all the testing on cars. And I think they're going to be a big part of this as well. They've actually developed a system right now to actually be able to qualify how good certain crash avoidance systems are on cars, so that people, when they're looking at these things now in their cars, they can make a good determination of what works and what doesn't. So I think that organizations like this are also going to be part of this spectrum in looking at these new cars and saying, okay, this car is a good one, this car is a bad one. Not necessarily looking at the crash testing, but looking at maybe the software and the way that these work on the highways. And in cases where you have to travel far, you know, do they have compatibility as you cross state lines? That's going to be a big issue. I mean, think about that. You know, we were just talking about this. The Mercedes-Benz, for instance, has a system right now that they're testing in Germany, where they've actually driven 60 miles, I think, through cities and been able to test it. You take that with a Chrysler, maybe, you know, or another American car, or any other foreign car, and you have to understand whether those systems are going to be adapted. The other thing to understand is whether from state to state to the federal, you know, the things that they put in the markers on the freeways and the highways, are those going to be compatible? So yeah, there's going to have to be standards at the national level. There's going to have to be standards at the state level, and even at the local level. Keep in mind that most of your driving is local driving, and you're going to have to make sure that those systems work at the local level, you know. And we've tried some automated systems. I mean, if you think about the red light cameras right now, they've fallen out of grace. You know, there was a great safety issue that helped us stop some of the worst kinds of crashes that happen at intersections, but people didn't like them. They didn't like the setup. So now a lot of the cities are phasing out the red camera program. So again, even at the local level, there's going to be a lot of work in developing systems that will help detail and control these kinds of things. Yeah, you know, that's the biggest issue for insurers right now is culpability. If you think about what auto insurance is all about, when there's an accident, you know, there's two cars or three cars, whatever the accident scene might happen, there's always a responsible party. Now, it may not be that they're fully responsible. You know, sometimes an accident will assign 50% to one and 50% to another, or 40% and 60%. But when you're talking about a system like this, where you have software, you have an auto manufacturer, and then you have pretty much a person in the car that's not really a driver because they're not controlling it, then how do you assign that, you know? You also have to think about maintenance. Now, this is another issue that we have to look at too. This came up when we started looking at some of these new ride-sharing programs, for instance. In California, we work with some companies to develop some new laws that allow people to share their cars. Now, the issue there, and one of the issues that comes up is, what about maintenance? What if you don't maintain your car? You know, if the instructions say you have to maintain and do this, but you don't have the money, and then you have an accident, is it your fault? Is it the manufacturer's fault? Is it the software maker's fault? So again, we know that as this develops, as these cars get brought into the marketplace, there's going to be issues that we can't even think of now that are going to pop up. And if I'm not mistaken, there's still going to be attorneys around, and they're going to certainly find the ways to develop lawsuits to challenge all of these as well. So it's going to be a push and pull, but I think it's dynamic enough to where, again, you can't stop progress. This is going to happen whether we like it or not. It's happening now. It's going to continue to roll. And what we have to do is we have to try to maintain and try to make sure that we're able to adjust to this changing environment. And this is in all cases. It's all about not just liability, but it's about the quality of these cars, the quality of the software. You know, is there going to be pirated software? Another thing you got to think about, what about hackers? You know, we're seeing this already, you know, in some of the new systems, some of the new safety systems in cars, there's hackers out there that can actually control cars. You know, they can hack into the system and control it. So again, another issue that we're going to have to deal with is car piracy. It's not going to be auto theft anymore. It's going to be auto piracy of the systems. There you go. I remember when I was a kid, I had a mini bike that had a governor that controlled the speed. I took that sucker off, man. I didn't want to have anything to do with anything that controlled how much speed I had. But yeah, these are all very legitimate concerns. They're challenges. And I think what we have to look at in this case is not be afraid of it, embrace it and say, okay, we're going to take it head on, but we're going to have to adjust and we're going to have to deal with it. It's dynamic. It's going to be continually changing, And again, we have to be able to adapt. That's the main thing. And as a representative of the insurance industry, I don't want to be on the side, the slow side of the governmental agency. I want to be able to say, okay, let's do this, let's work on this, and let's move ahead. And that's what we've done. I mean, if you look at it, we worked with our local state legislature to come up with a law that allowed the cars to be tested. You know, Stanford is doing the testing, Google is doing the testing right now here in California, and we had to have a law that allowed these cars on the road. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of people driving that see these cars and go, what the heck is this? I've seen a couple of them on the road as I'm driving, and I've wondered, wow, this is very interesting. So again, we have to change the law. As insurers, we have to adapt our policies to this and try to understand the risk. Our actuaries are going to go crazy. That's going to be the tough thing. The most important thing is that there has to be open communication between all. I think that you can't look at this as in a vacuum. You can't look at one issue, you know, the manufacturing, the software, or the insurance in a vacuum. I think that they all have to meld together. There has to be chemistry. I hate to use the pun, but there has to be chemistry between all three of them, because we're all going to have to rely on each other. You know, as insurers, our policies are going to have to reflect what the risk is based on what we know about the software. Software is going to depend on the manufacturer. Manufacturer is also going to look at insurers and say, we need some help in making sure that, you know, we're covered. So I think it's a team effort, and I don't think you can look at it one in a vacuum and say, okay, it's going to work. They all have to work together. Yeah. You know, to me, it's an exciting time. And I think the exciting part of it is that we're seeing advances after, you know, they call it the digital revolution, but when digital technology came in, it was kind of like the Industrial Revolution. It's catapulted us ahead to such an extent that we're going to see some incredible changes going on in our lives. Autonomous cars are one of those. And for me, as a car enthusiast, as a person in the insurance industry, I'm excited about that. But at the same time, I understand that there's going to be challenges. And I think that if we can confront those challenges with excitement, saying that there's a good at the end of this rainbow, I think we're all going to be better for it. I think ultimately, if what we think these cars are going to do is save lives, I think they will. Then less people on the highways being killed, I think, is a great thing. 30,000 people a year die on our highways in accidents. So if we can curb that would be awesome.